mixing and code switching are very common among multilinguals, and these terms are either used interchangeably or code switching is used as an umbrella term for any kind of change in between languages in the same utterance or sentence or the same conversation. Code switching and code mixing always happen when languages or dialects, variants of a language, different registers of a language are in contact, whether this is in a multilingual society or in a multilingual community or family or a conversation where multiple languages are used. Not all linguists consider it necessary to separate the two terms and concepts for the purpose of their area of research, but some use code switching only for the language change in adults and code mixing only in young speakers. But fact is that if you navigate the research, it can be quite disorienting. It's thanks to some linguists who went to great lengths to differentiate the two phenomena that we can distinguish them in a way that I'm about to explain. The use of the two terms depends on the context, so let me focus on two that are most important and interesting when talking about code switching and code mixing among multilinguals. Scholars of the conversation analysis, such as Peter Auer and Li Wei, argue that it's about social motivation. Social motivation seems to trigger code switching, and we can recognize a structure or a pattern in a conversational interaction. The main question here is, for what reason does code switching occur? This cannot be answered without first addressing the question of how it occurs. In conversation analysis, the focus is on the sequential implications of code switching. This means that whatever language a speaker chooses to use for a conversational turn or part of a turn impacts the subsequent, the next choices of language by the speaker as well as by the listener. Let me make an example. Here I have Mark, who only speaks English, Carlo, who only speaks Italian, and Laura, who speaks both languages. Mark says, "How was your day, Laura?" And Carlo says, "Già, com'è andata oggi?" Laura, looking at Carlo, "Non c'è male," looking at Mark. "It was okay." Laura switches languages when looking at Carlo first, then Mark, adjusting her language choice to convey the message in a required language, in this case Italian and English. To quote Annick de Hauer, bilinguals switch languages to accommodate the language spoken by their conversational partners. The communication accommodation theory focuses on explaining the cognitive reasons for code switching and other changes in speech by either emphasizing or minimizing the social difference between oneself and the other person in the conversation. Now, this means that when speakers, for example, seek approval in a social situation, they are likely to adjust or converge their speech with that of the other speaker. This can mean that we adjust our accent, our dialect, and also paralinguistic features used in a conversation like the prosody, the pitch, the volume, the intonation, and also the language of choice. When we want to convey our disapproval, on the other hand, and create some kind of distance to what and how something is said in a conversation, we use what is called divergent speech. We may emphasize linguistic features that are characteristic of our own group in contrast with the one of the other group we want to distance ourselves from. Think about those who use technical terms or abbreviations that are not very transparent to the audience to emphasize that they are the boss or the expert. Or think also about using a posh accent to signalize the otherness. Let's have a look at two contexts of code switching. The first one is in inter-sentential switching, which means in between two sentences. The example is, I was looking for you, ik heb je nergens kunnen vinden, which means I was looking for you, I couldn't find you anywhere. So the other person might be more fluent in Dutch, so Dutch is used to make sure the message is understood. Another context of code switching can happen in intra-sentential settings, so within a sentence. This I want, genau das. This I want, exactly this. Or I like the pannenkoeken and tompoesen. I like the pancakes and puff pastry. Here, the use of the other language creates more closeness to the other person, gets the attention, emphasizes the particular Dutch pastry, for example. I believe that this last kind of examples causes problems between code switching and code mixing, because you can find studies about code mixing that would show examples like this. That's to say, where the two languages are mixed in the same sentence. But I think the main difference lies in what Anita Hauer points out about code switching, and I quote, "Code switching is a conscious process of alternating language." Let's have a closer look at code mixing. Code mixing is usually considered the placing or mixing of various linguistic units. These can be affixes, words, phrases, clauses from two different grammatical systems or languages or codes in the same sentence and speech context. And it's rather an unconscious process. And very often it's analyzed in young children who are still acquiring language or learning languages at an early stage. I like to think it this way. Let's assume you transmit 3 languages or dialects to your children. It's like giving them Lego pieces in 3 colors, where each color stands for a different language or variety or dialect. If you ask them to build a house, they will use all the colors, concentrate on the shape, and if the pieces stick. We know that in children who grow up with multiple languages, all languages are constantly active and they are competing with each other, which means that the first word that just comes up is the one that is uttered by the child. Let's go back to the Lego. Our children will use the language based on what they have understood so far and proceed by trial and error. If you asked your child then to build a yellow house, that's to say to speak in only one language, maybe because you are with a person who only speaks that language, it can occur that your child doesn't find the matching yellow piece quickly enough and adds a blue one. So your child will still build the house, metaphorically speaking. The other person might even understand what the child is saying thanks to the context, maybe gestures used or intonation. But when the key element of the phrase, let's say the noun or the verb, are not clear enough, we, the parents or caregivers, teachers, can help the child find the matching piece by modeling the sentence like it should be. For example, if the child says, "I want the Paars cup," you may want to model, "Oh, you want the violet cup," to mediate between the child and the other person. Or say things like, "Do you mean the violet or the pink one?" And then the child might be able to specify violet and even say the word to make it clear. Beginning at the babbling stage, young children in bilingual or multilingual environments produce utterances, sentences that combine elements of both or all of their developing languages. Sometimes we can recognize this mixing by change of intonation. Some suggest that this code mixing reflects a lack of control or ability to differentiate the languages. Others argue that it is a product of limited vocabulary. Very young children may know a word in one language but not in the other, like in this example that I just gave to you. Studies argue, though, that this early code mixing is a demonstration of a developing ability to code switch in socially appropriate ways. Now, for young bilingual or multilingual children, code mixing may be dependent on the linguistic context, on the cognitive task demands, and the other person involved in the conversation, if she knows or does not know the other language. Code mixing also helps to fill gaps in their lexical knowledge. Code mixing among bilinguals is highly interesting because we can explore the mental structures underlying language abilities of the child or the person actually learning the language. Let me quote King and Kendall about code mixing in child language acquisition. I quote, "During language acquisition and learning, nearly all bilingual or multilingual children go through a period in which they move from one language to another without apparent discrimination." Think about the Lego metaphor. Code mixing is therefore not intentional, not a conscious process, and doesn't aim to create empathy or distance. Let me make some examples. On a lexical level. Gestern sind wir alle zusammen zum Cinema gegangen und anschließend zur Bar. Yesterday, we all went together to the movies and afterwards to the bar or pub. The other language is here used alternatively in the same sentence, but for other reasons. The child or the teenager, maybe in this case, doesn't know the term in the other language yet or is not confident using it yet. Uses the inserted terms more frequently in the other language than the one he or she is speaking at the moment. Let's make another example. If my child who speaks Dutch, German and English says things like ich habe meine Hausaufgaben gemacht, wenn ich nach Hause kam. So I did my homework when I came home instead of als ich nach Hause kam. And I know that the conjunction when, which means at or during the time, is used in the context in English, and it sounds exactly the same in English and German, but has another meaning in the context. I know that my child needs more modeling and experience with using wenn and als in German. Let's make an example of code mixing on a morphological level. Ich möchte das Auto kolorieren. I want to color the car. Now, the verb kolorieren exists in German, but this particular child had never heard that word used in German, but only ausmalen or anmalen. But he used frequently the Italian verb colorare, which led him to use colorieren in this particular context, where color is taken from the Italian colorare, voglio colorare la macchina, and iren is the ending of some verbs in German sentences, for example, probieren. The fact is that our child is actually experimenting with the different parts of words in both or all the languages and combining them like Lego puzzles and seeing if they can stick together, and sometimes they stick and we actually understand what they are saying. Let me make an example on the syntactic level. I want the bleu car, with the base language or matrix language is English. Or je veux la voiture bleue, with French as the basic language. Base or matrix language means that the syntax structure is grammatically correct in that language. So, because the adjective, for example, precedes the noun in English and follows the noun in French. So these two sentences are grammatically seen correct. Just the adjective used is from the other language. If then we have sentences like I want the car bleu or je veux la bleue voiture, these are two agrammatical sentences in the respective base or matrix language that show that the person doesn't respect the correct syntax structure. But we can see that the person is using the French syntax structure for English and the English syntax structure for French, right? So this is an interesting kind of code mixing that gets often undetected and flagged as difficulty in understanding the language of instruction, for example, when teachers, professionals don't know the other language the child is acquiring or learning, and therefore don't recognize this mix of codes. When a child says something like, she the book read, one can quickly assume it's incorrect. But if the child speaks also Korean or Turkish or Punjabi or Tamil, this sentence has a clear grammatically correct word order that is subject, object, verb. So the same goes for the following sentence. When someone says, ate the cookie, which is agrammatical for English, but perfectly fine for all languages that construct sentences with a verb, subject, object order, like Arabic. So for language learners, constructing sentences in a certain different order than they are used to takes time and practice. I often get asked when a parent should worry about the child mixing languages. Here are just 4 red flags that might indicate that the child needs some help with figuring out how the languages he or she is learning function. But when should we ask for help? When over a long period of time a child is using consistently the syntax structure of language B while speaking in language A, and the child gets qualitative exposure, is prompted to form sentences in both languages separately, but just seems not to be able to separate the two syntax structures, but seems not able to separate the two Lego sets. When a child is not able to form an age-appropriate sentence with regards to the complexity in the target language in monolingual settings, or when a child uses words in a random order that cannot be explained by the order of words in other languages the child is exposed to, and when the child seems not to understand the meaning of the words he or she is using. And here it's about words that the child should be knowing at that age and developmental stage. I would like to end with an encouraging quote from Helen Grech and Barbara Dodd. From a very early age, bilingual children make conceptually sensitive linguistic choices that drew on a developing knowledge of their separate language systems, switching languages according to the interlocutor. Code switching. The sociolinguistic situation contributes significantly to the language use of bilingual children, indicating that language mixing requires a high degree of language awareness and competence, rather than reflecting a deficiency in linguistic knowledge. Now, this topic can be discussed for hours, so if you have questions or suggestions about further videos like this, please let me know in the comments. And if you liked the video, please click subscribe and click the bell to be notified every time I publish a new